Morning, and welcome to the meeting for the Growth and Regeneration Scrutiny Panel. Can I remind attendees to put your phones on silent, please, or switch them off. Before we move on to the formal agenda, I'll ask that we do a round of introductions. So I am Councillor Zarina Amin, the chair of the meeting. I'll start from yourself.
John Milner, Co-optee.
Chris French.
Councillor Munro, Almonbury Ward.
Councillor Bill Armour, Burton Ward. I'd like to remind you to use your microphones, please.
Councillor Harry McCarthy, Corn Valley Ward.
Councillor Matthew McLaughlin from the Corn Valley Ward, here to observe.
Councillor John Lawson, Cleckheaton, here to observe.
Thank you. From officers?
Jo Scrutiny, Group Leader for Planning, Policy and Strategy.
Hi, I'm Edward Highfield. I'm Service Director for Skills and Regeneration.
Councillor Graham Turner, Cabinet Member for Finance, Regeneration, Economic Growth.
Thank you. Governor's Office?
Jenny Bryce-Chan, Principal Governance Officer.
Thank you. I'd like to go through the formal agenda. So, membership of the panel. Can I ask the Governance Officer, have there been any apologies for the meeting? Minutes of the previous meeting. We're looking at approving these. That was held on the 23rd of September 2024. As there's only myself and Councillor Darji present, are we okay to approve the meeting?
Yes, we are, Chair.
So approved. Declaration of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare? Admission of the public. There are no exclusions of the public items, and all agenda items will be considered in public session. Jenny, have there been any deputations and petitions?
None received, Chair.
Public question time. Any questions from members of the public?
Again, none received, Chair.
Agenda item 7, proposed National Planning Policy Framework reforms, consultation and other changes to the planning system. Would Jo Scrutiny please present the item? Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to the members for inviting me today to talk about the reforms. Consultation on the reforms came out of consultation July to September of this year. There were 106 questions across all the topics within the current National Planning Policy Framework. So today is just going to be a little bit of a highlight on some of the key issues. If there are other issues from the reforms consultation that members would like to chat about, we can do that following the meeting. So, just a summary of some of the key implications, just to set some headlines, and then I'll go through these in more detail as we go through the presentation. So the government has maintained its focus on having a local plan. They must be produced at pace. They must be kept up to date. And for authorities in Kirklees' position, we've been given a December 2026 submission requirement. That's in advance of our published local development time to scale, which was already ambitious for March 2027. They've introduced a new standard housing method, which will increase our housing figures. I will go into that in more detail, but essentially, if that standard method is introduced within the National Planning Policy, it will increase our figures by 30%. There's going to be a greater focus proposed on strategic planning. For those who were perhaps part of the core strategy originally, like the regional spatial strategy, there'll be a body there for West Yorkshire guiding strategic decisions and local authorities. When we look at requirements for land, we must also look at the land take to deliver economic growth, and numbers there will depend on our ambitions. The reforms also introduce Brownfield First and a new land allocation called Grey Belt. Again, I'll go into that in more detail. So this slide just sets out the government's objectives for the planning reforms. This is taken from their consultation document, but it's all about delivering growth, specifically 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years, a focus on supporting the economy, but within that, getting high quality places and more affordable homes. So the big message is about getting Britain building again. There's also a big focus on climate change, renewable energy sources and clean energy. Oh. So this is just a bit of a scene setter. So while the consultation came out July to September, the plan is that they will have a revised MPPF December or the beginning of early next year. Some of the reforms actually reverse the changes that were introduced in 2023, and some are additional changes. This is the first step in a number of consultations. So following the finalised MPPF, there's an intention to produce the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, and then the publication and consultation on National Development Management Policies. That will be a suite of national policies that all local authorities will be required to follow. There have also been some indications that they may revise the planning policy for waste and for travellers' sight. So while we've got a sort of indication of some of the jigsaw puzzle pieces, we haven't got the complete picture yet, so we'll need to come back to you and keep you updated on those. Just again about the reminder of the local plan, universal coverage, up-to-date plans. I've talked about new timescales for the plan arrangements. There are transitional arrangements for other authorities based on where they are in the plan system and their housing requirements. I don't know whether you'll be able to read that, but you have got the slide. This is our current local plan timetable, where we're looking at early engagement. The first stage of this would be at the end of November, and we'll be going out to the communities and our partners, asking for views on what they consider to be the challenges and the opportunities for Kirklees moving forward. This will inform the vision and the content of the plan, and we'll look at that alongside the evidence that we're currently gathering. Because we haven't got all the picture yet on what our development requirements will be and how we need to deliver it, we're then going to introduce a phase 2 early engagement in the new year, hopefully when we've got the MPPF in place and some more of the guidance that's come forward, and we've got a better position of the national development policies. Because from that we'd want to look at deriving some locally specific policies for this area. Draft plan consultation, September to November 2025, with publication a year after, looking at a submission in March 2027. As I said previously, the government are looking to shorten that timescale, and we are meeting with the Planning Inspectorate and the Planning Advisory Service to get some guidance on that. In terms of what the MPPF is proposing, it's proposing a new standard method for determining housing requirements. Our current method is based on housing projections, and it's a advisory starting point for looking at housing numbers. The new standard method, if it comes in, is based on housing stock, which is adjusted to reflect housing affordability, and that standard method would be mandatory, so we would have no choice but to follow it if it comes in. The current method does outline some exceptional circumstances. Again, in the new method, it is going to remove those exceptional circumstances, with the exception, as I've set out at the bottom of the slide, for national parks and the Isle of Scilly. So what are the implications for Kirklees of this new standard model? Well, as I said, it would increase our housing requirement by 30%. We're currently, the plan sets out a requirement for 1595 dwellings per annum. We uplifted this figure to 1730 for economic growth. If this new method goes forward, then we would be looking at over 2,000 new homes. Now, that figure has been set out in the national planning reforms, and as you'll see, there's numbers have been identified for our adjoining authorities. I will go into the role of strategic planning more, but just note that the strategic planning, if that is introduced, they will have a role in determining how unmet need is delivered. We don't currently know how that is, but that may have an implication for our overall figure. The good news is from the reforms, there's a greater focus for authorities being able to determine in their levels and types of affordable homes. It includes social rented housing as well. Some of you may be aware that we have currently seeking views through a survey for our strategic housing market survey, which will give us more information to inform those needs. And all members should have had an invitation to a Teams meeting, I think on the 14th of November, where you have an opportunity to ask our consultants directly about the work that they're doing and the survey work. Again, just as a reminder, on top of that figure, we do need to think about employment. What do we want for our growth ambitions in terms of employment for Kirklees? That will affect our consideration of what land requirements come forward. All this has to be kind of taken on board in the light of our development constraints, so our topography, any environmental constraints, flood risk areas. We join part of the national park. That will influence where we can develop and the type of development. Strategic planning, as I said, this is a new focus on this. We currently do duty to cooperate with our adjoining authorities, and the need to work with our adjoining authorities is part of the examination process. But the strategic planning looks at reinforcing that. One of the benefits could be joined up and considered infrastructure for West Yorkshire, looking at how that we all deliver our growth needs. Again, on the perhaps con side is just thinking how do we work within that process to look at determining how unmet housing needs are met. I've heard unofficially that there may be a white paper on this in the autumn with consultation followed by legislation, but I've got no timescales for this as of yet. Brownfield, grey belt and green belt. So this is a big focus within the reforms, and it's about looking at how we can bring development forward and where we can develop it. So the principles are a brownfield first approach. It doesn't mean brownfield only. And then the release of low quality grey belt lands. Point 3, I've set out the definition of grey belt land. This is land in the green belt comprising of previously developed land and other parcels and all areas of green belt that make a limited contribution to the 5 purposes of the green belt. And on these grey belt sites, there is going to be implications for golden rules where they want at least 50% of affordables and better access to local green spaces. As part of the reforms, we have asked for more clarity on and guidance on the grey belt so that we can properly consider how we might take that forward, and also what advice that we give to developers on that, and looking at the viability of sites. Implications for Greenbelt. Well, 68% of Kirklees is Greenbelt. We do have a brownfield register, which currently shows that we've got insufficient capacity to provide future land requirements just solely on brownfield land. So we will have to look at the grey belt sites and the green belt. So to inform this process, we've commissioned consultants to undertake revised guidance on greenbelt parcel analysis. We hope to get that information back by February of next year, and that will again be used to inform the way forward. The reforms also look at reforming planning fees, looking at proposals to increase the fees for householders. There's two main elements of that. It's a choice whether these planning fees are set nationally or at a local level. Our concerns about a local level is that that would need ongoing evidence to justify those costs, and that would need to be kept up to date. It may also lead to a position where adjoining authorities have got lower fees, which may draw development away from our area. So I think the feeling from our development management colleagues is at the moment is that they would like those reforms to be set at a national level, and then there's consistency. We'll see what comes back in the reforms. As I said, there's a whole host of other changes to the MPPF, a lot around design. They've moved away from doing a district-wide design code to looking more specifically at local design and maybe just on key strategic sites or key places within the plan. They've removed the term beautiful because that was very subjective, and they've invited further views on design within those reforms. There's also a focus on supporting economic growth in key sectors, particularly within data centres, gigafactories and laboratories. For us, we need to consider that against our own local priorities, and our inclusive economic strategy, which is currently being developed, will look at the key sectors that Kirklees wants to pursue. Skills is a very important part of that. If we can increase skills and access to higher paid jobs within the district, that is good for us all in terms of economic growth and affordability for homes. They want to move more towards a vision-led approach to transport rather than predict and provide. And we're working with our colleagues in the transport strategy section through their emerging transport strategy to look at how the plan can help deliver that. Delivering community needs, healthy communities and energy efficiency, again focus within the reforms. And there are questions within the reforms asking local authorities what they want in terms of policy guidance within that. We're currently working with public health colleagues and our environment strategy colleagues to look at future and new improved policies that we would like to see within our local plan for that. Again, there's a lot of text on here, but what do the reforms mean for the local plan process? Well, as I've said, we will need to look at our timetable. What can we realistically produce within the timescales that is of a high quality that meets all the requirements to get a plan which is sound and will go through the examination process. And as I said, we are working with the Planning Advisory Service and the Planning Inspectorate in advance of the reforms to try and shape our programme going forward. We've spent the best part of this year gathering up-to-date guidance and evidence which will help to shape our strategy and our policies, and those have been listed within that second box. We're particularly looking at more robust strategic flood risk assessment, and we're working with Environment Agency to see whether we can do better than the norm on that, because that would fit in with our climate change ambitions and sustainability ambitions. So there's a lot of work going on with partners there. There may also need to be some further evidence, because as I said, the national planning policy hasn't been totally clear on what is required for climate change. So we may need to review that programme and look at some more evidence, particularly around viability, to justify an enhanced climate change position. And we've been learning from our colleagues at Leeds City Council, who've had to do some extensive viability testing on their policies to take them through the process. We will continue with the policy review, looking at local policies that meet our local needs and which can be used in our planning decisions. We will need to frame those within the national development management policies. So again, that's work in progress on that. We're also ongoing with our call for sites, where we are inviting submissions of sites for potential development or the protection of sites. And you'll regularly see us on sort of social media and through the Kirklees comms, reminding people that that process is still open. That's me.
Thank you. Does the portfolio holder have anything to add?
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, can I thank Joe and her team for the amount of work that they've done on this. This is a huge consultation that's come out of government. Massive change to the planning system, many of them well overdue, and we need to get this country back to building homes and providing those much needed homes for people, and this seems to be a step in the right direction. It is worth pointing out at this stage that this is a consultation from government, and obviously we'll have to wait and see what the final decisions are from them, but obviously as we're developing our local plan we have to take in alongside that some of these changes may well be implemented. There may be changes because it is a consultation after all, but so trying to do a local plan with these going along one side is a huge piece of work, and I can't pay tribute enough to the team for managing to get where we are so far. It's a tremendous piece of work, so thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Just take questions.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of linked questions about something that you haven't mentioned. And it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine regarding land banking and an associated topic, which is where we have a minimal start to a development, which then leaves it open, there's no end date. And we did have an example in the Colne Valley where some curbs were put in 50 years before, and it was then held that they had started, so they could continue with the previous. So is there any way that the Kirklees as a council has got any input to try and address these issues?
I know this is a hobby horse of Councillor Turner, so I won't take too long on this. I'll hand over to him. What we did as part of the reforms, I think it's question 14, is we did highlight this issue, and we did say the delivery of sites is not just down to planning, and we did ask what could be done to incentivise developers to bring those sites forward. Because as you all know, we had a very ambitious local plan before. We took it through the process, we identified the sites, we had an ambitious number. Planning permissions were being granted, but they're not actually being delivered on the ground. So we do need some help from the government as looking at the development side as well as the planning.
Yes, thank you. My thoughts entirely.
And as Joe's rightly pointed out, it is a hobby horse of mine. I have no solution for land banking. I have discussed this with previous MPs, current MPs, occasionally the odd minister when I bumped into them. Officers around in this room will know, again, it is one of the things I would love to find a solution for. I sat on planning for, I think it was 12 years, and there were sites that I sat and get permission for it and still not a brick has been laid. I wish I got a solution for it. I've thought about it. I've asked others, and there's no easy solution to this, unfortunately. We live in a democratic society. We can't force someone to do something just because they got permission. They'll say they haven't got the money or they're in demand powers. There's a million excuses. I don't see an easy answer to it, but I really wish there was, because it is infuriating when I've been sat there and I was sat at that very end and they give a permission for 300 houses and not one of them been started. It's really infuriating. And we meet developers on a regular basis as officers myself to discuss this, and quite often it's not them, it's some of the bigger companies as well that do this, and it's really frustrating. It really is. Last time I checked, and I have to be honest, I've stopped bothering checking now. There was 8,000 permissions granted without brick being laid. What was the last number? About 15 to 18,000 people on the waiting list. 8,000. You don't need to be a genius to work out we could solve a lot of our homeless problem by if these developers go on and get these houses built. That they've got permission for. We've given them permission to build them. So please, build them.
Thank you. Councillor Munro.
I've just got several questions. So my first one is, how will the council deliver on the new mandatory target when it's not been able to meet the target set under the previous local plan, which was actually increased for the delivery of economic ambitions, and I would have said it was basically unrealistic and too ambitious. My second question relates to brownfield grey belt sites. There's no mention of greenfield in that. So I'd like that to be considered before we actually even start to think about green belts. And I would just like to point out the purpose of Greenbelt is to prevent the merger of settlements. So developing grey belts in Greenbelt will actually detract from the purpose of Greenbelt, and I could see that having implications, in the future for further development in the Greenbelt. I'd like to know what the council's response was to the consultation on that. And basically, how does the council plan to ensure our local communities have a meaningful voice and role in this process of the new local plan and development of the new local plan? And what is the council doing to ensure developers will build affordable homes? Thank you.
Do you want me to take some of those? So you're right, it's an ambitious target that it looks like we've been set by government. Don't forget it's not been confirmed yet. That's the indication at the moment. It is ambitious. We need to be ambitious because, as I said earlier, we have a huge problem with people, of homeless people. We have a huge problem with people on housing waiting lists. So it's right to be ambitious. It will be a challenge. It will be a stretch. We know that we're under capacity. Capacity problems within the building industry from a labour shortage, skill shortage and supply chain issues, and that's one of the reasons why we as a council are investing in a skills college in Dewsbury to try and bring more people into the building sector. So we're doing something along those lines. There does need to be massive investment in training and education to provide us with the builders and all the associated trades of the future, which will obviously take a little while. And it's right to be ambitious. Whether we deliver that target, only time will tell. As I said only a few sentences ago, some of this doesn't lie at our door. Some of this lies at the developers who spend money on planning applications, sometimes thousands and thousands of pounds, and then don't do anything. So there has to be a partnership approach. Our developers, the landowners and the big companies need to start working more closely with us to ensure that those sites are permission, are developed for the much needed homes we need in this area. And going back to Greenbelt, well, we'll have to, consultation, you mentioned consultation. There will be a huge amount of consultation. I lived through the last local plan and there was consultation after consultation, public meeting after public meeting. So there'll be a huge amount. And of course, at the end of all this, there will be a public inquiry at which members of the public are allowed to go along and say their opinion. So there'll be more consultation you can shake your stick at.
Sorry, can I just come in there? I actually was referring to the consultation that's closed in September 2024, wondering what the council's response was to the grey belt issue. Thank you.
We responded to the grey belt issue. We had concerns about what it actually meant. We spoke to our development management colleagues on this, and we all agreed if we were working with developers, what consistent messages would we do? So we've requested more guidance on that and a framework so that can be applied consistently. One of our concerns was because it relates to previous development sites on the edge of settlements, whether there was the potential for land to be degraded and then classed as a grey belt. So we asked for what reassurances that we could do to kind of have a robust process against that and deal with those issues. We're certainly not against brownfield first, it's the achievability of it. Yes, looking at greenfield. And then you talked about the 5 purposes of the green belt. Those 5 purposes will still be in the national planning policy. There's no indication that those will be changed, so we will assess all development against that. And a big part of our revised Greenbelt parcel analysis will be to look at development on the edge of those settlements and how they perform against the 5 purposes. So it's not development at all costs. Those Greenbelt functions still exist and still have a priority. Just to follow up on the consultation, we've put in extra stages of consultation within our plan. There is an argument that we could actually meet the government's timescale if we took one of those elements of consultation out, because we don't have to do a draft and publication. But it was agreed at Council and Cabinet at the back end of last year, October and November, that it was really important that we took communities on the journey with this through us. So we've maintained those stages of consultation. So unless we're told otherwise by the government, that's our plan, and we'll see what efficiencies we can make around that, but we are committed to keeping communities involved.
Sorry, I think my final question was about how do we ensure that affordable housing will be built? Thank you.
Okay.
It's part of it's currently part of our policy. It'll be part of our policy going forward.
Councillor Turner's correct. As part of our LP11, we currently require 20% of affordable housing, with the emphasis from the government that local authorities can have more powers to look at affordable housing and the type of it. That gives us greater strength to go beyond those limits. What we are doing with the strategic housing market assessment and working with our colleagues across services who deal with dementia, care, supported children, care homes, they're all feeding into that process so that we've got the evidence to justify new and more robust policies. There will always, I'm sure you're coming to this, there will always be the arguments thrown back to us against viability. We've raised those through the consultation, but I feel with a stronger national platform and revised evidence, we're putting ourselves in the best possible position to negotiate for more affordables. Oh.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, can I just add, affordable housing is vitally important, as you rightly point out. Of course, there's always the argument about viability, which Joe's mentioned, and also what is the definition of affordable housing. There's several different ones. Also, what we must not overlook, we must not overlook that we need to build more social houses for rent, because not everybody ever will be able to afford their own home. So we've got to be able to provide decent quality homes for people to rent at a socially acceptable price, and that's part of the policy as well, hopefully going forward. We need more social rented housing in this country and in Kirklees.
Chair, if I could just add as well that the Council does look to provide more affordable housing, particularly social rented housing, through working with Homes England and a range of partners. It's not just through the planning process. We bring our own land forward, as we've brought to Cabinet's attention previously and will continue to do so, so that we can deliver and be assured that we can deliver more affordable housing. Our partners in the housing association sector work with us, and as I said, we ensure that, working with Homes England, we ensure that grant comes from the government to subsidise the cost of delivering more affordable housing. So it's not just through the planning process. We've got a dedicated team within the council that's there just to deliver on more affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Lawson?
Thank you, Chair. That came around quick. Was there somebody else before me? Sorry. No? Okay, thank you. Couple of questions in a similar vein. One is on our concentrating on economy and growth in terms of data centres and gigafactories. And I just wonder, in terms of design, what extra powers will we have to make sure that those are as green as possible? The biggest energy consumers in possibly an industry at the moment, and it's very easy for them to be very wasteful. So I just wonder whether we've got any extra powers, or whether there's any of that coming forward, that we can sort of limit some of that waste and some of that energy waste, or reutilise some of the excess energy or heat and that kinds of things. So that's one question. The other question really that I've got is about what scope is there in the new plan and within the new NPPF to improve our strategy for housing for care leavers. Now, I'm saying this with my Kirklees parenting board hat on, and it's very important that our care leavers have appropriate housing to go to, because some of it isn't at the moment. So we do try our very best to try and house our care leavers in the most appropriate settings. And I just wonder how much of a strategy we will be able to, or how we will be able to strengthen that strategy going forward.
So in terms of design of the economy and growth sectors, the first point is that those sectors are still out for consultation within the NPPF, but the NPPF does promote greater controls over design, and also through energy efficiency and climate change. So I would hope as a whole, once we get that finalised NPPF, that we will have the framework to be able to do that. We do still have the opportunity to do locally specific policies. So design is being looked at as part of the new local plan. There may be something that comes out through the National Development Management policies, specifically on design, which will give us a national framework for that. I don't know, but we are looking at it, and I know that design is very important across the whole of the member discussions that I've been having, particularly that focus on place and our communities. So we'll be looking at that as a key element of the plan moving forward. In terms of scope in the new plan to improve housing for care leavers, we've already been talking to colleagues within the council who to deal with that. They have attended our stakeholder events on the strategic housing market assessment, and they are feeding back to our consultant specifically on those issues. So we've got more information to inform it, and from that we can build a policy framework. So I haven't got all the details for you, only that process is ongoing.
Just come back briefly. That's very, on the second point, that's very encouraging to hear. I know we're right at the beginning of the local plan design, and I look forward to many more sessions like this where that kind of information can be fed back in a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to go back to the issue that was obviously pretty important to Councillor Turner, which is this undeveloped allocations. Now, to me, maybe I'm missing something here, but if we've got 8,000 undeveloped allocations, and we're now looking to try and find more land to release, like Greybelt, etc., we're going to be adding to the unallocated, undeveloped allocations, because the developers are going to find this land, buy it, get planning application, and then do nothing. I think there's a fundamental problem here, which is the developers have no incentive to build in a lot of these places. Now, they come up with all these excuses, and I know there is a shortage of labour and that sort of thing, but unless central government do something to fix this, i.e. something like impose a penalty on non-development of land. So if they're given a plot of land and they've got the planning permission on it, which seems to be not an issue. I mean, if there's 8,000 out there, it's not an issue about getting houses built on houses through planning. But if they don't develop that within, say, 3 years, there should be a penalty on them, which says you're going to be charged this much for non-development. If it's not developed in 6 years, I mean, it seems quite simple to me, or am I being daft here?
I would agree. I've always thought that there should be some sort of penalty, if you like, or my personal choice would be for every house you haven't built, if you got 200 and you haven't built them within, or you haven't started and delivered a significant portion of them within so many years, then you pay council tax on the ones you haven't built. That's how I do it, and that would focus the minds a little bit. But don't forget, developers are very cute. Some of these organisations turn over billions of pounds and make billions of pounds of profits. They don't have these huge head offices sat there with loads of people twiddling their thumbs. They're full of planning lawyers, consultants, etc., trying to work their way around the system to maximise their profits all the time. So it's a bit of a game of cat and mouse with developers, or certainly the larger ones. So it'd have to be very tight legislation. And we do have to always have at the back of our mind, I think, that we do live in a free country, and should be too draconian about what somebody does with the land that they own. It's getting a balance, I think, and I think the council tax route, after a certain set period, would focus some minds, but it would take quite complicated legislation, because they would, not be disrespectful, some of the big developers would try and find a way around that, as we've seen up and down the country, as they do, because that's the way they operate and maximise their profits. But you're right, it makes no sense to be granted planning permissions when we've got 8,000 sat out there. But there's all sorts of reasons, viability. We can't sell them. We don't think there's a market for them. I've heard all these excuses over the 12 years on planning. But until we do, like you say, introduce something that forces their hand, we're a bit stuck at the moment, unfortunately. But it would have to be very clever, very well-written legislation to make sure we delivered. And rather than just pay a few quid, we actually want them to build houses. I don't want to fine them. I don't want to give them, disincentives, if you like, to build. We want them to build houses. It's simple. You've applied for permission. Build the houses. We've got a massive waiting list. National issues around the houses. We all know the housing market's broken. The government white paper from Theresa May, first line with the housing market's broken. We still haven't fixed it. We can only fix it if people build houses. And it's sat there, and if there's 8,000 here, how many is it nationally? I haven't even bothered to check, because I think it just really annoyed me too much. So I haven't even bothered to check nationally, but it must run into the millions. And people sat on there either waiting for a rainy day when they think they can get a bit more money for it, or whatever. It's ridiculous. You're absolutely right. It's absolutely ridiculous. Or even possibly, it could be really draconian, say after 5 years, we'll seize it and put social out, we'll get a developer put social hours on it. But there has to be something to force them, because the current system is not working. We've got to do something. You're absolutely right.
Thank you. It's a really good point. Maybe we should be lobbying our MPs. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Chair. For a start, I'll just pay tribute to officers who are having to do this at the same time, having to do a local plan review at the same time as the government is reviewing its planning policies is not the easiest thing. So, I mean, yeah, definitely have a lot of respect for officers doing that. I have a few questions, if you'll indulge me, Chair. The first one is, when the council made its submission to the NPPF consultation, were the views of elected members represented? Because I think it's one of the things that when we reviewed scrutiny previously, we did sort of say we want more pre-decision scrutiny, more proactive scrutiny. So it would just be good to know kind of were the views of elected members or Scrutiny kind of consulted before we went through that? Just to echo what Councillor Armour and Chris said about land banking, I can think of so many instances in my ward where developer has got planning permission, they've set on the land, but often it has kind of even worse consequences because, you know, a good one would be there's quite a few redevelopments of mills to build them into housing or some sort of commercial development where they've got planning permission, they've not done anything, the condition of the building deteriorates, and then suddenly in a few years' time they come forward and say, well, you know, we can't execute the original permission, we've got to go and do something that's completely different, and that kind of degrades the built environment and the Cone Valley's industrial heritage over time. So I think that's one aspect of it that also needs to be looked at. I don't really have an answer about land banking, about how to address it. It's an incredibly difficult issue, but I do think that if we're going to respond to these things as a council, we've got to kind of push the government as much as possible to address that, because planning reform on its own isn't really going to get all the housing that we need. And then the final thing was that although the planning reforms I think are welcome as part of the government's mission to get the country building again and tackle the housing crisis and kickstart economic growth, one of the things that is kind of missing is social housing, as opposed to just affordable housing. I think we've all got stories in our wards of people who've been on the waiting list for loads and loads of years, particularly families where there's just a huge lack of kind of properties with lots of bedrooms come available. There's kind of the starts of a strategy from the government, I think, but they've got to put a lot more detail into how they're going to achieve that social housing. So I do think that as part of the local plan review, we need to give a lot of consideration, much more consideration than I've done in the past, to increase the amount of social housing. Thank you.
Okay, in terms of member involvement in the submission of our responses, that was a officer response that went through the sort of executive process of being signed off by our portfolio holder and through the senior leadership team. I have since presented to leading members and taken them through the comments. We also reviewed our comments against the LGA's comments, which was sort of a group submission of local authority comments, and our comments were very much reflecting what the LGA had said, although what we tried to do with ours was bring that Kirklees perspective to it, because I went to a series of government and planning advisory roadshows beforehand, and they said rather than just say what you want, what you don't want, make it very specific to your area so that we know the issues and the nuances which each local authority is dealing with. Land banking, we've talked about, haven't got an answer to that. Only to say again, as part of these roadshows, without exception across the country, local authorities were giving this message back to the government and to the Planning Advisory Service to take back. So they've got the message that it's an issue. We need to see what comes out of that, if there's anything within sort of legislation or national planning policy. Agree about the social housing, is looking at what Kirklees needs and how the local plan can deliver that. The reforms give us a stronger framework to be able to do that. And as I've said before, with the strategic housing market assessment, that gives us the evidence, and also working with our colleagues across the council who are actually working with, people who are in need of that housing and the type of housing. So that is very much front and forward of the plan going forward.
Yeah, can I just assure Harry that before the responses went in, I read all the responses from officers, and where necessary made comments. Most of them were very technical questions, so there wasn't a lot of if you like, public engagement or member engagement, because I said they were really technical questions around planning, legislation, etc. But I can assure you I did read all responses before they went in and make comment where appropriate.
Yeah, just to give members assurance, we get lots of consultation requests across different policy areas, and it's an executive function of the council to respond to those and make sure that we do that in a timely manner. On this occasion, obviously, we have afterwards come to members to just check back that the responses that went in terms of this particular issue were in accordance with them. I'm absolutely sure because, as Joe says, we've talked to all the group leaders. There was no difference in terms of the group leader's opinion to what was submitted, and as Councillor Turner says, we'd spoken to him beforehand in detail. In terms of the other couple of issues, the Council's Kirklees' industrial heritage, I do think that's a very good point, actually, that we need to make sure that that is preserved and actually enhanced as we go through the planning process. We work very closely with Historic England as well as through our planning process to ensure that we do enhance that, and again with government to ensure that we get funding in where appropriate to enhance it. And you'll see through some of the investments that have been made in Kirklees that we are continuing to protect the industrial heritage within the borough. In terms of social housing, again, I would say absolutely, we are doing everything we can to deliver more social housing and social rented housing in particular, because we understand that that's where there is a specific need and continuing need within Kirklees. Again, planning has its role to play. But we're looking closely at the government's reforms or proposed reforms to right to buy and what that means in terms of retaining our existing council housing stock, where the majority of that social rented housing in Kirklees rests, and also we'll look carefully at any future rent and income assumptions that the government is setting out as to how that allows us to move forward with more social housing in the future, and again accessing grant income as we can. And we will look through the general development process to ensure as we can that we deliver social rented housing as opposed to other forms of affordable housing, because again that meets more of the needs that are clearly set out from the housing market assessment that Joe mentioned previously.
Thank you. Supplementary?
Thanks everyone for the answers. That's been really informative. I think just to come back on some of the stuff about land banking and then bringing forward sites, I think it's going to require a lot of kind of particularly working with the combined authority and the mayor to kind of bring some of these brownfield sites and grey belt sites forward. I can just think of so many different examples where sites have stalled because whatever reason possible. They are much more difficult to develop, but one of the things that really comes forward when you speak to people is, you know, people much prefer brownfield sites to be developed, and you've got a greenfield site somewhere that is being built on, when at the same time you've got, you know, big mill complexes in the centre of a village just sort of sat there not doing anything. It does cause a lot of people are understandably quite concerned about that. So I think working with the combined authority, kind of broker these sites, and then using money streams. I know the government did announce some pots of money for affordable housing in the budget to bring forward these sites and develop them. And as well, about the heritage and the built environment, I think almost in the past few years, this isn't so much kind of a criticism of the council, but rather wider government policy. We've sort of left it to the private sector to maintain these things and then redevelop these sites, and then unfortunately they either haven't been willing or haven't been able to redevelop them and bring them into new usage. And it's incredibly disappointing, for example, if you go down between Wellhouse and Linthwaite, where you've got Titanic Mill, which has been redeveloped. It looks absolutely stunning, and then next to it is Lower Westwood Mill, which is basically completely collapsed. So we can learn from ways in which the private sector and the public sector have worked well, and then also areas where they haven't been able to maintain that built heritage. I think is quite important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lawson?
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on the heritage point, yes, I'm very interested to see what will happen around that, having a couple of local issues that are live at the moment around a heritage ask. But seeing as we're dusting off hobby horses, brownfield, one of the things that I've been impressed with recently is the drawdown that Kirklees has made from WICA funds to enable remediation of some brownfield sites, to move them on, to unblock the very events that have just been described, actually. When that has happened on some occasions, though, the money that was provided to make the schemes viable, has been very valuable and done the job well. On the other end of that, though, then our 106 negotiations with some of those sites have then still fallen foul of the viability rules, and we've not been able to extract full value out of those 106 agreements. And I think really we should pay full attention to that in the local plan, to make sure that we disassociate those and to make sure that we make full value out of 106 agreements, even if they've had some issues with viability in the past. If government money has been provided to fix those issues, then they should still be liable for their 106 responsibilities. Thank you.
Just to say, your points are noted, and we'll take that forward in our scoping of the plan.
It was more comment than question. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any more questions?
I've had my light on for a long time.
Oh, you didn't indicate to me. Sorry. Councillor Darji.
Been waiting a long time. Is there a problem with the system or something?
No, others have actually made me aware, just indicated to me, so...
Well, how else?
I just thought it was on for a while, to be honest. Apologies for that.
I don't understand. No here. Okay. So, I'm just trying to understand the unmet needs and the gaps in housing requirements. Do we have information about the gaps in terms of needs within Kirklees and what the numbers might be, so we have a better understanding? Also, in terms of social housing, what are the unmet needs there and what are the gaps, and how can we bridge those gaps? And in particular, I'm also concerned about young people and the homelessness of young people, including care leavers, and how can we actually meet those. And are we saying that, according to this, if I'm reading it right, that we require 38,000 homes up to 2043, and we're proposing to build 2,000 homes in Kirklees? Am I correct in understanding that? So so it's about how we're going to meet the needs and how can we make sure that the people are catered for in terms of housing needs, in particular social housing. Is there a way of building cheaper housing rather than, for example, might be completely off the mark, but what about prefabricated buildings? Build cheaper houses that still meet the needs, that are still of good quality, but will help us to provide more homes for people. Is that something that can be looked into? I haven't finished yet. And the things I'm hearing that developers take up land but don't build. So if my understanding is correct, are the developers required to pay deposits to make sure that they do actually do what they're going to do as well? So that's just...
Can I I'll just pick up one point when you talk about what you call cheap housing, what you call off-site construction. We've just won an award was it last week? Last week for the work we've been doing with Keep Moat and Homes England in Batley, the Sut Hill site that's taken nearly a lifetime to get to to getting on site, and we're using off-site construction there. The units are manufactured in Dewsbury and shipped over to Batley, so from an energy point of view, there's very little energy used in their construction, and they're built very quickly, very efficiently. I've been to that site a number of times, and I'm highly impressed with the quality of the site, and I can't thank our officers enough, because I say it's taken somewhere between 7 and 10 years to get this site away, but those off-site construction, yes, it can be used, but again, like anything, there's only so much capacity within the off-site construction industry. I have been to some other off-site construction companies and looked at the products they provide, and I don't think they're what we want here in Kirklees. If we're going to use off-site construction, they have to be of quality, they have to be of good design, and I don't want little square boxes built in a production line out of steel frames. That's not what we want in Kirklees. We want quality homes at decent prices or social rent for our residents. So we are doing that already.
David? I think David did you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to come in on a few of those questions, if that's all right, that Councillor Dargy asked. So building cheaper homes, as Councillor Turner's already set out, that there are clear standards in terms of building regulations that we will always adhere to, and we wouldn't go below those. We would also we have to bear in mind that there have been some significant catastrophes in this country, most recently Grenfell, in terms of cheaper building methods being applied and not necessarily being regulated effectively. So unfortunately, we've all had to learn the lessons there and ensure that we don't lower the bar. But I know that's not where you were going. I think you're looking at all possible areas of ensuring that we deliver the maximum number of homes to meet the needs, and that's something that we're absolutely committed to doing. In terms of the 38,000 and 2,000 numbers that you said, 38,000 overall over the planned period, but 2,000 per year is the rate of delivery. So that's the 2,000 is an annual figure that we would expect to be delivered, but at the present time, as other councillors have said, we're not meeting that anywhere near that at the present time, hence why we're going through the local plan revision to ensure that we identify appropriate land and opportunities to deliver those homes, but that will go through the full consultation process. Members of the public as well will have an opportunity to comment on all of those. And I would just comment just to reiterate what the answers that were given previously around how do we understand our need. We understand that because we do a number of different studies to be really clear on what the housing need is. And as Joe says, there's the housing market assessment, which is a dynamic assessment that we undertake to understand what the needs are in terms of the housing market, but also we look at a housing needs assessment on our own data. So we have just short of 22,000 council homes, and we have 6,000 or 7,000 housing association properties within Kirklees. We understand the lettings data of that, and we use that to inform what particularly the social housing needs are within Kirklees. So we understand that on a very dynamic basis, and we can feed that in to say, well, what does that mean in terms of the number of affordable homes? So we have quite an accurate picture in terms of the housing needs. The issue then comes because it takes a number of years of getting a local plan into place, and then it takes a number of years to actually deliver the housing on site once you've got a local plan in place. So there is a potential there for things to get out of kilter, because by the time we've got this local plan into place, and then by the time we're delivering the homes, there could be a difference there in terms of the needs as they present themselves. So we have to keep reviewing that as we go along.
Thank you, David. Just let Jo come in, because she still has to answer one of your questions.
No, that's fine. David's just picked up everything that I was going to say on the unmet needs element. So.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I still don't understand the numbers in terms of gaps as opposed to needs. Do we have numbers in terms of...
We will have the numbers because we also have to monitor through our authority monitoring report and through our 5-year housing land supply, and as David said, through the mechanisms. I haven't got the numbers on me, but if I've got your question, I'm happy to feed back to Scrutiny on those numbers after this meeting.
I think it's important to know the numbers. Yeah. And do we have information in terms of young people and needs and gaps and numbers?
Again, we're working with relevant colleagues within the authority to learn more about young people and homelessness. The national planning policy has placed a greater focus for us to be able to look at homelessness, but the solution isn't all down to planning policy. And again, as David was saying, we need to work with the relevant services across the council and our partners to see what we can do in terms of planning, but also other mechanisms to look at homelessness and particularly young people.
Can we have numbers?
I will see if I can get those. I will see if I can get those numbers.
And just, I didn't mean that you actually build bad quality homes in terms of cheap. You know, that's not the issue. Of course, you've got to meet requirements and have, according to spec. Of course, you have. But if there's a cheaper way of building homes that meets all those needs, provides good quality, but is done cheaper, I really think that's worth looking at. That's my view. Maybe I need to do a bit more research and come back with be more specific as well. But got experts here who may have more information to go on. Because I think if we're going to carry on like this, then the needs are going to get bigger. We're not meeting them. And how are we going to meet them? And I also ask about the housing waiting list in Kirklees, what the numbers are there.
So in terms of the number of people who are registered on Kirklees waiting list, it's around, it's just over 20,000 people that are registered for council housing. Not all of those are active at any one time, so we do review that list, but that's remained a consistent number. So we know that, as other councillors have noted, there is a significant need for social rented housing, and with the stock, even though we are a stock holding authority, not all authorities are, we've got, as I said, just under 22,000 council homes. We still cannot meet the overall need that is expressed within Kirklees, and you see that as a result of that number of people who are registered for council housing. That said, we are not that much different to other parts of the country. Unfortunately, there is an unmet social housing need across the whole of the country at this time, which I know won't be any comfort to you, and anything we can do to address that, we are doing.
Thank you. I also would like to point out that the homeless strategy, which is currently being developed by officers, has been to a previous meeting, as have the housing. Councillor Darji, if you didn't attend those meetings, so you may want to watch those online. Councillor Munro.
I don't think that matters. The question is, I've asked some questions and information. I don't think you need to come back.
I'm just letting you know in terms of information. So if you watch those meetings, the ones that you didn't attend, you'll be able to pick up that information from there. Thank you. Councillor Munro.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a final question on Greenbelt. In the previous local plan that was adopted in 2019, there was some fair, I would say, residents felt it was fairly high grade Greenbelt land that was developed and is currently, under going through the planning process. So, is there, if Greenbelt land has to be included in the revised local plan? I'm just asking, could we please, try and avoid including high grade Greenbelt as much as possible? Thank you.
In the previous plan, all sites were assessed using our Greenbelt edge analysis. Each site was assessed consistently against their contribution to their 5 purposes of the Greenbelts, as well as other site assessment criteria. We will have a different but updated process to do the same process for the sites this time going through the process. We made all that information available and it was tested at examination. So it is really important that we get that right, and we do know that we will be tested on it. It also has to go through a sustainability appraisal process, which is a legislative requirement for us to do that before we could proceed to the examination as well. So yes, it's scoped into the work.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Hiya. On the land banking issue, has it ever been considered whether CPO rules can be brought into that if land values supported that? And
I'm not aware that we've ever, as a council, but the problem with CPO, people assume that it just gives us the right to go, in effect, steal some land as the owners would see it. It takes anywhere between 18 months and 2 years, is extremely costly, and you have got to prove beyond reasonable doubt, I think the words almost are, that, that this site, is vital to your strategic direction, which may be difficult with some of these sites. So it's probably not a go, to be honest with you, if I'm honest. Too expensive, takes too long, and how could you prove that this site is any different to that site, to that site, to that site? And they'd have clever lawyers who would argue against it. It would just be very expensive. I think some form of cost to the developers at some point further down the line when they haven't developed is a way to do it. It's a bit of a nudge. If you don't do it, it's going to cost you a bit of money. And I think council tax is the right way, because at the end of the day, it's us it affects. If you had a national scheme, it would go to the government pot, wouldn't it? We'd never see it. If it's taxed locally, because it's costing us locally, because when we don't build a house, we don't get the council tax. When we don't build a house that somebody's homeless, it costs us for putting them in a temporary accommodation. So that cost falls on us, because in some cases the developers are not doing what we would like them to do. So I think that council tax route will be the way for me. But I'm not in government, but well, I'm not, but we are in government, my party. So hopefully they will look at something like that. But the money should come to us, not go to national. And I suspect the Treasurer might go, oh, that's a good idea, but we'll get the money. It has any fine or whatever you want to call it must come to local to offset some of those costs that we meet, because of the failure to have as many homes as we need.
And just another one I had is, I believe there's a shortage of planners. So is there an initiative to train and recruit them locally to actually deliver this plan?
The government has just said through the autumn budget that they will make money available. I can't remember the sum of money for the training and recruitment of planners and apprentice planners, which is great to see. I don't know how quickly that will come through to more bodies in the process. But as Edward's always aware, I'm always banging on his door for more staff. So we've got a local initiative going on.
Thank you.
Just on that, there is a national shortage of planners. It's not just here. We have a problem that it's absolutely everywhere, and it's right that the government does this. But don't forget, these are highly skilled, highly trained people. So the solution might be to put some money now, but that will take a number of years to have any significant effect. And of course, the problem you then got, and we need to be mindful of this, we may have a bit of unforeseen circumstances, because what the problem we have at the moment is the private sector will go to the planners and say, come and work in the private sector, the consultants, etc., and pay the significant amount of money. We need to be careful that we're not training the private sector of the future. Taxpayers' expense at the moment, and we still don't get the planners. We just get more consultants getting paid a lot more money. So we need to be careful how we do it, because we may get the unforeseen circumstances of playing the private sector training fees. Perhaps the private sector needs to train some of their own planners rather than coming poaching them from local authorities.
Unfortunately, that is what is going on. I have a couple of questions of my own. So I have actually seen some appeals allowed for Greenbelt. Have there been any in Kirklees? And are any of these appeals can they be used as benchmarks as well for how we would assess Greenbelt? And my second question is with regard to the additional changes to the MPPF. Post 16 educational places, are there any details and how do you see that being implemented? Thank you.
In terms of appeals, it would depend on the 5-year land supply position. So currently we don't have a 5-year land supply, so somebody could come in with an application, and if they could justify that there was presumption in sustainable development, the tilted balance, that could be considered. That's why we're trying to get a plan in place as soon as possible. In terms of specific appeals, which we've had recently in the Green Belt, I'd have to go away and talk to development management colleagues on that, which I'm happy to do so, but I can't think of anything currently.
No, I'm not aware of anything specific that would give us cause for concern. I think generally speaking, Kirklees has got a pretty strong track record through the appeals process. The vast majority of appeals uphold the original planning decision. But as Joe said, we are now in the world of not having a 5-year supply, so it's possible that we might have more challenge to that in the future, which is a really good reason why we need the local plan.
And in terms of education places, we're currently working with Jane Lima and Martin Wilby in education to update their education's contribution policy in advance of the local plan. It's being revised in the light of the DFE guidance and the ability to redirect Section 106 monies more effectively to get the places that are needed. I think Jane and team are on with rewriting the policies, and then the role of the policy team will be help to get some viability information again to support that document when it's used in planning decisions by our committees and development management colleagues. We'll again look at it as part of the local plan process to see what we can do in terms of not just education, infrastructure and monies, but wider infrastructure and Section 106 policies.
So in terms of education, how do you see, what would be the visible change that we would see, so the end result?
Just thinking, I've not been directly involved in the policy update. What our education colleagues are doing is re-looking at the need for where the places are. I think previously there was a high need at primary age, and I think it's more at secondary age. So they are re-looking at what provision is needed and how that would translate into what we need and into what areas. And then there's the process of re-looking at how the monies can be directed to fund those improvements. Again, I can have a conversation with you afterwards with Martin, if that helps, and that can be fed back into the scrutiny minutes.
Chair, if I can just add, it's the issue you're highlighting is an age-old issue for planning authorities up and down the country. How do you match particular needs of the education system and make decisions? It's similar, but even more complicated to the social housing answer that I gave earlier, because of the passage of time that happens. Because what we're trying to do here is predict what's going to happen in terms of demographics and population changes over time, and make provision in terms of whether it's school places or post-16, as you asked in your answer. One of the things that we do though is, as well as the planning system trying to do what it can to ensure that there is appropriate provision and appropriate land set aside and appropriate policies in place to support the funding of educational places, we also work on a day-to-day basis with our education providers within Kirklees. So in terms of post-16 in particular, Kirklees College, Huddersfield New College and Greenhead College, we're working with them on a very regular basis to understand what their particular needs are, whether they are, in the case of Greenhead College, they've been expanded on their site, as many people who are aware of the building works that have been going on there, to ensure that they can keep up with the demand there. Similarly, with Kirklees College, as a council, we've directly intervened in the past in order to provide development funding and a loan to Kirklees College so that they can deliver educational provision in Dewsbury. The Pioneer House development just a few years ago is a good example of that, because they particularly wanted to access to ensure that people in North Kirklees, young people in North Kirklees, had access to education provision. We are continuing to do that, again through Regeneration policies and activity in North Kirklees. So we've got construction focused education provision for post-16, working with Kirklees College again there. And similarly, we work with Huddersfield New College on a very regular basis to connect young people through to education opportunities that they may be able to avail themselves of there. So some of it happens within the planning policy, which, as you can appreciate, there are limitations to what the planning policy can do. The rest is linked into other areas of the council's activity, so that ultimately what we're trying to do is ensure that Kirklees' young people have the best opportunities wherever they are in Kirklees.
That's really positive, thank you. I would appreciate a conversation as well. Do any members have any additional questions? Right, then I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you everyone for your attendance.